Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to control your thoughts, the more elusive mental peace becomes? There's a reason for this, and once you see it, everything shifts. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, as you're reading this, try not to think about a bright red fire truck. Don't picture its shiny red paint, don't hear the loud sirens, don't imagine it racing down the street. What happened? The moment I told you not to think about it, that fire truck probably appeared crystal clear in your mind. This simple demonstration reveals the fundamental flaw in how most people approach thought control. We've been taught to fight our thoughts, to resist them, to push them away when they don't serve us. But this approach is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more forcefully it springs back up. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share something that might sound counterintuitive at first, but by the end, you'll understand why your struggle to control your thoughts has actually been strengthening their control over you, and how to reverse this process completely. Picture Sarah, a successful marketing executive who seemed to have everything together on the outside. She was respected at work, had a loving family, and appeared confident in every meeting. But inside her mind, a different story was playing out. Every morning, she'd wake up to an immediate flood of anxious thoughts about the day ahead. What if the client presentation goes wrong? What if I say something stupid in the meeting? What if my boss realizes I'm not as competent as they think? She'd spend the first hour of each day trying to push these thoughts away, telling herself to think positive and stop being so negative. She'd repeat affirmations, try to distract herself with music or podcasts, and force herself to focus on her to-do list. Sometimes this worked temporarily, but the thoughts always returned, often stronger than before. During important meetings, she'd find herself distracted by an internal commentary that never seemed to stop. While colleagues were discussing strategy, part of her mind was analyzing whether she looked confident enough, whether her last comment sounded intelligent, whether people could tell she was struggling with self-doubt. She felt like she was living two lives, the competent professional everyone saw, and the anxious person trapped inside her own mind. The exhaustion was becoming unbearable. She was spending so much energy fighting her own thoughts that she had little left for the things that actually mattered. Her relationships were suffering because she was never fully present. Her work performance was declining because half her mental capacity was tied up in internal battles. She felt like a prisoner in her own mind, watching helplessly as her thoughts dictated her emotions, decisions, and quality of life. This is what happens when we misunderstand the nature of thoughts and try to control them through force. We create an internal war that drains our energy and, paradoxically, gives our thoughts even more power over us. The very act of fighting thoughts makes them more persistent, more intrusive, and more convincing. The deeper root cause of this struggle lies in a fundamental misunderstanding about what thoughts actually are and how they work. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that our thoughts are facts, that they represent truth about ourselves and our circumstances. We treat them like important messages that require immediate attention and response. But thoughts are not facts. They're simply mental events that arise and pass away, like clouds moving across the sky. Some thoughts are useful and deserve our attention. Others are just mental noise, old patterns, conditioning, and random neural activity that has no bearing on reality. The problem arises when we can't distinguish between these different types of thoughts and respond to all of them as if they're equally important. When we try to control thoughts through resistance, we're actually feeding them more energy. It's like adding fuel to a fire while wondering why it keeps burning brighter. Resistance creates tension, and thoughts thrive in a tense mental environment. The more we struggle against them, the more solid and persistent they become. Think of a river flowing toward the ocean. If you try to stop the water with a dam, pressure builds up behind it until eventually something breaks. But if you create channels that redirect the flow, the water moves naturally toward its destination without force or struggle.
Our thoughts are like this river. They have a natural movement and energy that can be worked with rather than against. The most persistent thoughts often carry emotional charge from past experiences. When we try to suppress these thoughts, we're also suppressing the emotions underneath them. These emotions don't disappear. They just go underground where they continue to influence our behavior unconsciously. This creates a cycle where the thoughts keep returning because the underlying emotional energy hasn't been acknowledged and processed. Nature shows us a different approach to dealing with forces we can't control. Trees don't fight against strong winds, they bend and sway, allowing the wind to pass through and around them. Mountains don't resist earthquakes, they absorb the energy and remain standing through their deep foundation and flexible structure. Ocean waves don't fight against rocks, they flow around them, finding the path of least resistance. What would happen if you could relate to your thoughts with this same natural wisdom? What if you could observe them with the same detached interest you might have watching clouds form and dissolve in the sky? What if you could feel the emotional energy behind thoughts without being overwhelmed by it, like feeling the warmth of a fire without being burned? This shift in perspective opens up entirely new possibilities for mental freedom and peace. Let me tell you about Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroscientist who spent years studying the brain's response to meditation and mindfulness practices. Despite her expertise in how the mind works, she found herself trapped in patterns of obsessive thinking that were destroying her personal life and professional satisfaction. Elena's mind was constantly analyzing, planning, and problem-solving. Even during supposedly relaxing activities like dinner with friends or walks in nature, she couldn't turn off the internal chatter. Her thoughts would jump from work problems to relationship concerns to future worries, creating an exhausting mental noise that never seemed to stop. She tried every technique she'd studied in her research. She practiced meditation, used cognitive behavioral therapy strategies, tried thought-stopping techniques, and even experimented with various medications. Some approaches provided temporary relief, but the fundamental pattern of mental agitation remained unchanged. Everything shifted when she met Master Chen, an elderly Tai Chi instructor who taught in a small park near her university. Elena initially approached him for research purposes, curious about how Tai Chi practitioners achieved such apparent mental calm. But what she discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about thought control. Master Chen never talked about controlling thoughts. Instead, he taught Elena about mental Tai Chi, the art of moving with thoughts rather than against them. He explained that thoughts have their own natural rhythm and energy, just like physical movements in Tai Chi. The key wasn't to stop this energy, but to learn how to dance with it gracefully. When strong thought comes, Master Chen explained, don't push away, don't hold tight. Like water flowing around rock, acknowledge, allow, redirect. He taught Elena to notice thoughts with the same gentle attention she might give to the sensation of breathing or the feeling of wind on her skin. The transformation was gradual but profound. Instead of fighting her analytical mind, Elena learned to appreciate it as a powerful tool that she could use consciously rather than being used by it. She discovered that thoughts naturally dissipate when they're observed without resistance, like steam rising from hot water and disappearing into the air. Most importantly, Elena realized that the goal was never to have a completely quiet mind. The goal was to develop such a stable center of awareness that thoughts could come and go without disturbing her inner peace. She learned to distinguish between the observer and the observed, between her essential self and the mental activity happening within her consciousness. This understanding revolutionized both Elena's personal life and her research. She began studying what she called neural flow states, brain patterns that occur when people are able to observe their thoughts without getting caught up in them. Her work showed that this state of conscious observation
actually changes brain structure over time, strengthening areas associated with attention and emotional regulation, while reducing activity in regions linked to obsessive thinking. Here's what transforms everything about controlling your thoughts. True mental freedom comes not from controlling thoughts, but from changing your relationship with them completely. This reveals the fundamental misconception that keeps most people trapped in mental struggle. We've been trying to solve the wrong problem. The issue isn't that we have difficult thoughts, it's that we've forgotten we are not our thoughts. We become so identified with our mental activity that we believe we are the voice in our head rather than the awareness that hears it. Let me tell you about the space experiment that Dr. Elena conducted after her breakthrough with Master Chen. She asked participants to imagine their thoughts as objects floating through the vast space of their consciousness. Instead of trying to control these objects, they were instructed to simply notice the space itself, the awareness in which thoughts appear and disappear. One participant described it this way: "It was like realizing I had been focusing on the furniture in a room while completely ignoring the room itself. Once I noticed the space, I realized that no matter what furniture comes and goes, the room remains unchanged." This shift in perspective from being lost in thoughts to recognizing the awareness that observes them is the foundation of true mental freedom. While most people exhaust themselves trying to think different thoughts, true mastery comes from recognizing that you are the thinker, not the thoughts themselves. You are the sky in which clouds of thought appear and dissolve. You are the ocean in which waves of emotion rise and fall. This understanding doesn't eliminate difficult thoughts, but it completely changes how they affect you. Consider how a skilled meteorologist relates to weather patterns. They don't try to control the weather or take storms personally. They observe atmospheric conditions with professional interest, understanding the natural forces at play, and make decisions based on this awareness. They remain unaffected by whether the weather is pleasant or challenging, because they understand their role as observer rather than victim. When you truly grasp this principle, three natural shifts occur that transform your mental experience completely. First, thoughts lose their compulsive quality. They become like background music that you can choose to pay attention to or not, rather than urgent demands that require immediate response. Second, you develop what researchers call metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about thinking itself, which automatically creates space between you and your mental activity. Third, you begin to access what many traditions call witnessing consciousness, a state of peaceful awareness that remains stable regardless of what thoughts or emotions are present. Here's the practical magic of this understanding. When you stop fighting thoughts and start observing them with curious detachment, they naturally begin to settle. It's like muddy water in a jar. When you stop shaking it, the sediment naturally settles and the water becomes clear. The clarity was always there. It just needed space to emerge. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to your mental life. It means engaging with thoughts from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reactivity. You learn to work with useful thoughts while letting unhelpful ones pass through without resistance, like a skilled chef who uses the tools they need while leaving others in the drawer. The deeper layer of this insight is that fighting thoughts actually strengthen the very patterns you want to change. When you resist a thought, you create tension around it, which makes it more likely to return. It's like trying to delete a computer file by hitting it harder. The more force you use, the more problems you create. But when you observe thoughts with relaxed attention, you're accessing the delete function of consciousness, natural dissolution through awareness. The foundation of thought mastery begins with developing intimate familiarity with your mental landscape. This isn't about analyzing every thought or trying to understand where they come from.
It's about cultivating the capacity to observe your mental activity with the same naturalness that you might observe your breathing.
Most people are completely unconscious of their thought patterns. They're swept along by mental currents without ever stepping back to notice what's happening. Developing inner awareness means learning to catch yourself thinking in real time, like becoming aware of background music that's been playing all along. Start by practicing what researchers call thought labeling. Throughout the day, simply notice when you're thinking and gently label it. Thinking about work, worrying about tomorrow, remembering yesterday, planning dinner. Don't judge these thoughts as good or bad, just notice them, like a scientist observing natural phenomena. The key insight here is that the moment you become aware of a thought, you've already stepped outside of it. Awareness and identification cannot happen simultaneously. When you notice, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, you've automatically created space between your essential self and that mental activity. Practice distinguishing between different types of thoughts. Some thoughts provide useful information about your environment or help you solve practical problems. Others are simply mental habits, old patterns running on autopilot that serve no current purpose. Still others are creative insights or intuitive guidance that deserve attention and exploration. Learn to recognize the physical sensations that accompany different thought patterns. Anxious thoughts often create tension in the chest or stomach. Angry thoughts might generate heat or pressure in the head. Depressive thoughts frequently manifest as heaviness or fatigue in the body. This body awareness becomes an early warning system that helps you catch unhelpful thought patterns before they gain momentum. Develop what meditation teachers call choiceless awareness, the ability to simply witness whatever thoughts arise without immediately trying to change, analyze, or act on them. This is like sitting by a river and watching different objects float by without jumping in to chase or push away any particular object. Create regular moments throughout the day to check in with your mental state. This might be as simple as taking 3 conscious breaths and asking yourself, what's happening in my mind right now? These micro moments of awareness gradually build your capacity to maintain conscious observation even during challenging situations. Remember that the goal isn't to have a completely quiet mind. The goal is to develop such familiarity with your mental processes that you can navigate them consciously rather than being unconsciously driven by them. You become like a skilled sailor who understands wind patterns and can work with them effectively rather than being at their mercy. Once you've developed basic awareness of your thoughts, the next step is learning how to engage with them consciously rather than reactively. This means developing the skill to choose which thoughts deserve your attention and which ones can be allowed to pass through without engagement. Most people relate to thoughts like a tennis player who tries to return every ball that comes their way, even ones that are clearly going out of bounds. Mindful engagement means learning to let some thoughts pass by while consciously choosing to work with others that serve your highest good. Practice what cognitive scientists call cognitive diffusion, the ability to see thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths. When you notice a thought like, I always mess things up, instead of automatically believing it or fighting it, you might observe, I'm having the thought that I always mess things up. That's an interesting mental pattern that shows up when I'm feeling stressed. Learn to ask productive questions when engaging with thoughts. Instead of, why am I thinking this? Which often leads to endless analysis. Ask questions like, is this thought useful right now? Does this serve my highest vision? What would I prefer to focus my attention on? These questions redirect your mental energy towards solutions rather than problems. Develop the skill of conscious redirection. When you notice your mind caught in unhelpful patterns, gently guide your attention towards something more beneficial. This isn't about forcing positive thoughts, but about making conscious choices about where to invest your mental energy. You might redirect attention to your breathing, to something you're grateful for, or to a current task that requires focus. Practice working with emotionally charged thoughts without being overwhelmed by them. When strong emotions arise with certain thoughts,
Learn to feel the emotional energy without immediately acting on it or pushing it away. Imagine you're a caring friend listening to someone who's upset, present and compassionate, but not reactive or overwhelmed. Create mental categories for different types of thoughts so you can respond appropriately to each type. Practical thoughts about daily tasks deserve focused attention and action. Creative insights deserve exploration and expression. Worry thoughts often need gentle questioning about whether they're addressing real current problems or imaginary future scenarios. Self-critical thoughts usually need compassionate reframing rather than serious consideration. Learn the art of thought aikido, redirecting mental energy rather than fighting against it. If you notice persistent thoughts about a problem, instead of trying to stop thinking about it, you might channel that mental energy into brainstorming solutions or taking constructive action. If anxious thoughts about the future arise, you might redirect that energy into present moment planning or preparation. Develop patience with the process of change. Thought patterns that have been running for years don't transform overnight. Each moment of conscious engagement with your thoughts is like depositing money in a bank account. Individual deposits might seem small, but they compound over time into significant wealth of mental freedom. Many persistent thought patterns are actually carriers for unprocessed emotions. Learning to work skillfully with the emotional dimension of thoughts is crucial for lasting mental freedom. This doesn't mean becoming emotional or dramatic, but rather developing the capacity to feel emotional energy without being controlled by it. Most people either suppress emotions completely or get completely overwhelmed by them. Both approaches create problems. Suppression drives emotions underground, where they continue to influence thoughts and behavior unconsciously. Being overwhelmed means losing the capacity for clear thinking and wise action. The middle path involves learning to feel emotions fully while maintaining your center of awareness. Practice what therapists call emotional surfing, the ability to experience emotional waves without being knocked over by them. When strong emotions arise with certain thoughts, instead of trying to make them go away immediately, breathe deeply and allow yourself to feel the physical sensations in your body. Notice where you feel anger, sadness, fear, or excitement in your physical form. Learn to distinguish between emotions that carry important information and emotions that are simply old patterns being triggered. Current emotions usually have a clarity and directness to them. They arise in response to present circumstances and naturally dissipate when the situation changes. Old emotional patterns often feel familiar, repetitive, and somewhat disconnected from current reality. Develop curiosity about the relationship between your thoughts and emotions. Notice how certain thought patterns consistently generate particular emotional states. Observe how different emotions tend to trigger specific types of thoughts. This awareness helps you understand your personal mental-emotional ecosystem and work with it more skillfully. Practice emotional validation without emotional indulgence. This means acknowledging and accepting whatever emotions arise without immediately acting on them or trying to change them. You might say to yourself, "I notice I'm feeling angry right now. That's understandable given this situation. I can feel this anger without needing to do anything with it immediately." Learn techniques for processing emotional energy constructively. This might include physical movement, creative expression, journaling, talking with a trusted friend, or simply breathing deeply while feeling the emotion in your body. The key is finding healthy ways to allow emotional energy to move through you rather than getting stuck or suppressed. Create emotional safety for yourself by developing self-compassion practices. When difficult emotions arise, treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend going through a challenging time. This emotional safety makes it easier to face difficult thoughts and feelings rather than avoiding them through distraction or numbing. Remember that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. Even the most intense emotional states naturally rise and fall like waves on the ocean. Developing trust in this natural process of emotional change helps you stay present with difficult feelings without being overwhelmed by the fear that they'll last forever. The ultimate goal of thought mastery is developing complete freedom in how you respond to any mental or emotional state. This means that regardless of what thoughts arise or what emotions you're feeling, you maintain the capacity to choose your actions based on your values and wisdom rather than reacting automatically from old patterns. Most people's responses to thoughts and emotions are completely predictable because they're based on unconscious conditioning. Certain thoughts always trigger the same emotional reactions, which always lead to the same behavioral responses. Response freedom means breaking these automatic chains and introducing conscious choice at every link. Practice what psychologists call response flexibility, the ability to choose from multiple possible responses to any given situation. When you notice a familiar thought-emotion pattern arising, pause and ask yourself, what are 3 different ways I could respond to this right now? Which response aligns best with my values and long-term goals?
Learn to distinguish between responding and reacting. Reacting is automatic, immediate, and usually based on past conditioning. Responding is conscious, considered, and aligned with present wisdom. The space between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives, and this space can be cultivated through practice. Develop what researchers call emotional granularity, the ability to identify subtle differences in emotional states and respond appropriately to each. Instead of just noticing, "I feel bad," you might distinguish between disappointment, frustration, sadness, or overwhelm. Each of these states might call for a different type of response. Practice acting from your highest self rather than your reactive self. Before responding to challenging thoughts or emotions, take a moment to connect with your deepest values and ask, how would the person I'm becoming handle this situation? What response would I be proud of tomorrow? This helps you respond from wisdom rather than impulse. Create response protocols for common challenging situations. If you often struggle with self-critical thoughts, develop a specific sequence of responses. Notice the thought, breathe deeply, ask if this thought is helpful, redirect attention to something constructive, and take one small positive action. Having these protocols prepared in advance makes it easier to respond consciously when you're in the middle of difficulty. Learn the power of the conscious pause. Between any thought or emotion and your response, insert a moment of conscious breathing or awareness. This pause might be just a few seconds, but it creates the space for wisdom to emerge rather than reacting from old programming. Develop trust in your innate wisdom and capacity to handle whatever arises. Often our reactive responses come from the fear that we can't handle difficult thoughts or emotions. As you build experience successfully navigating challenging mental states, you develop confidence in your ability to remain centered and choose wise responses, regardless of internal conditions. Remember that response freedom is not about having perfect responses all the time. It's about gradually increasing the percentage of responses that come from conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. Each conscious response strengthens your capacity for the next one, building momentum toward greater mental freedom. As these practices become integrated into your daily life, you begin to experience what many traditions call natural meditation, a state where awareness of thoughts and emotions becomes as automatic as awareness of your physical environment. You're no longer practicing techniques to control your mind. You're simply living with conscious awareness of your mental processes. This integration happens gradually through 3 distinct phases.
In the first phase, you develop the basic capacity to notice thoughts and emotions without being completely identified with them. This creates occasional moments of space and perspective, but you still get caught up in mental patterns regularly. The second phase involves developing consistent skill in working with thoughts and emotions as they arise. You catch unhelpful patterns more quickly. You're able to redirect your attention more easily, and you experience longer periods of mental clarity and peace. You still have challenging thoughts and emotions, but they don't control your behavior as much.
The third phase is characterized by what could be called effortless awareness. Observing thoughts becomes as natural as observing your surroundings. You maintain a stable center of awareness that remains peaceful regardless of what mental or emotional weather is passing through. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or thoughtless, but rather that you're able to experience the full range of human consciousness without losing your essential stability. Throughout this process, your relationship with challenging thoughts transforms completely. Instead of seeing them as problems to be solved or enemies to be defeated, you begin to recognize them as teachers that help you develop greater wisdom and compassion. Each difficult thought becomes an opportunity to practice awareness, choice, and skillful response. Your decision-making improves dramatically because you're no longer at the mercy of impulsive thoughts and reactive emotions. You can feel the pull of old patterns without being controlled by them, creating space for decisions that align with your deepest values and long-term vision. Perhaps most importantly, you develop unshakable inner peace that doesn't depend on having the right thoughts or feeling the right emotions. You discover that your essential nature is already whole and complete, regardless of what mental activity is happening within your consciousness. This transformation doesn't require perfection or the elimination of all challenging thoughts. It simply requires the willingness to observe your mental life with curiosity and compassion, to practice conscious engagement with your thoughts and emotions, and to gradually choose responses that serve your highest good rather than just providing temporary relief from discomfort. The journey from being controlled by thoughts to mastering your mental life is ultimately a journey home to yourself, to the awareness that has always been present beneath all the mental noise, patiently waiting for you to remember who you really are beyond the voice in your head. When this remembering becomes complete, you realize that you never actually needed to control your thoughts. You simply needed to remember that you are not your thoughts. And from that recognition, natural mastery emerges effortlessly. The thoughts that once seemed so powerful and controlling are revealed to be temporary visitors in the vast space of your consciousness, no more defining of your essential nature than clouds are defining of the sky itself. This is the ultimate freedom, not the freedom from thoughts, but the freedom to dance with whatever arises in your consciousness from a place of unshakable inner peace and wisdom. Every thought becomes workable, every emotion becomes energy for growth, and every moment becomes an opportunity to express your authentic nature with greater clarity and love.